Well, I figured out where I'm going to put the plane. I'm just not sure where I'm going to put me. Kind of shady under here though. What's up everybody? You're watching Model AV8R. My name's Adam and I'm excited. If you follow the channel, you know I am a sucker for a good stole plane, and this is a very good one. This is the Arrows RC 1800mm Husky. It's a pretty large foam model. It is a sports scale example of an AV8R Husky A1C, and given the fact that it is a foamy and it's got painted windscreens, I think it's a very, very scale looking airplane. I'm really familiar with the full scale bird, and this looks really, really good. And if you want one, you can get yours at hobbyzone.com. Now, a quick little word about the Arrows plane, because I don't want to forget this. This is the first one that I've owned, assembled, and flown that was mine. But I have been around and flown several examples of Arrows RC airplanes, and I can say that the fit, finish, and money value and flight performance that you get from an Arrows airplane is really, really good. So if you haven't checked them out, go to hobbyzone.com, check them out, and see if they've got something that you'd like. I don't think you'd be sorry. They make really good airplanes, really good value for the money. So, that said, let's talk about the Husky. So, we have made what are probably, if you're familiar with this airplane, you've already seen some pretty obvious changes that we made to ours. It is worthy of note, we flew the airplane a good bit stock before we made any of these changes, so the reason we can actually call this a review, even though we've kind of made a project of some of the modifications, is we know the differences and we can tell you. It flies great stock, flies great with our changes. We'll tell you the difference in the sum up. So, the changes we made, the first thing that you'll probably see, your eye is going to be taken to these vortex generators. Those are from a Grand Tundra from Hobby King. The Arrows Husky has some vortex generators molded into the wing, but they're very, very small. They're not very high, and I questioned greatly whether or not they'd be effective or just for looks. So we put those on to see what it did, and turns out it did change the performance a bit. We'll tell you about that during the flight footage and in the sum up. The second thing you'll probably see is we are rocking the Dubro 4.5-inch big wheels. This airplane, like so many foamy stole planes, comes with wheels that feel more like a hockey puck than a tire. They're very hard. They don't help performance much at all, and even though the Dubro big wheels are a bit heavy, they're almost always going to be heavier than stock, especially if you get a bigger Dubro big wheel than you did stock. They're going to be a good bit heavier, but the way they land and the way they handle bumps and bounces is just so much better. It will make the airplane land better almost every time, and given the size and the wing area of this airplane, the extra weight of those 4.5-inch big wheels really doesn't make an adverse difference. The other thing that you might see, if you take a look at the landing gear cover, the wire landing gear cover, you'll see two black pieces between the landing gear cover and the bottom of the fuselage. Well, the bottom of the fuselage, where the airplane's gear mounts, is plastic. And then, of course, the landing gear covers are plastic. So anytime that wire gear flexes, the landing gear covers bang into the side of that plastic on the bottom of the fuselage, and makes kind of an annoying knocking noise. It doesn't affect performance. The noise is not going to change the way the gear works one way or another, but it just annoyed me. So those are two pieces of thick heat shrink that I glued between the landing gear cover and the fuselage, and that muffles that noise quite a bit, which made me a happy camper. The last and only other modification we made, and this one is the most significant, before I move the airplane. The AV8R Husky, as well as this model of the AV8R Husky, normally comes stock with standard flaps. Standard flaps are just hinged and they simply come down. What I did is I had a set of multiplex Fun Cub flap hinges laying around from an old Fun Cub I had 10 years ago. I used those hinges to turn this into a slotted flap. What a slotted flap is it actually separates from the airplane and comes down and leaves a slot between the trailing edge of the wing and the leading edge of the flap. The advantage of that is that you get the full advantage of the flaps, but with normal flaps, you have to bring the nose up a good bit. Change your angle of attack to a higher angle of attack to get the airplane to slow down. With slotted flaps, you can slow the airplane down the same way normal flaps do, and sometimes a little bit more, without having to raise the deck angle so much. It gives you a lower deck angle. The advantage of that with a full-scale STOL plane is being able to slow it down without having to raise the nose. Means you can see over the nose better into what you're landing in the backcountry, and that's kind of important. So we'll show you what that looks like. I'm going to have to try to pull these down far enough and lift the airplane up so you can see the slot right here. There's just some separation between the flap and the wing. That's what the slotted flaps look like. And of course, we'll discuss during the flying footage and in the sum up what all those changes affected as far as flight performance. I will say one thing about making changes like this. Every change we made was to try and make the airplane slow down and maybe land a little bit differently, a little bit slower. Anytime you have a bunch of grand ideas like we did and you want to make a bunch of changes and see what they'll do those one at a time. Make one change, test the airplane, see what the change that you made did. That's always the best way to do it. That way, when you're done, you know what was effective, what wasn't. If you do everything at once and then you get the result that you wanted, you don't really have any way of knowing if that's a combination of everything you did or just one thing working really effective and three things that you did were useless. You don't have any way of knowing that, so make one change at a time. That's always the best way to figure out what you're doing and what works best. So, with that, we're going to go to the setup page where you'll see what kind of battery we use, what our balance point is, what our throws are, normal stuff like that. We did a watt meter pull. You'll see what kind of power it makes on 4-cell. Then we'll show you some flight footage where you'll see the STOL performance, the slow flight performance, as well as the aerobatic performance, and the fact that none of the changes we made changed the aerobatic capability from stock, which is pretty cool. And then we'll come back here on the bench and we'll sum it up, where we'll briefly talk about the build, or assembly if you will. We'll talk about the differences in this, which is a version 1, versus the 5-cell powered version 2 that they came out, and what we think of that. And we'll talk about the difference in the flight performance of the airplane stock versus with the changes that we made. So check out the setup page, pause it if you want to take a good look at it, check out the flight performance. We'll see you back here in a bit. All this flying footage is on our standard HRB 4-cell 2200 30C packs. The Husky's really comfortable, low and slow. It's pretty comfortable everywhere. It's a very confidence-inspiring airplane. Here we're going to do a knife edge across the field, and like any high-wing airplane, there's a good bit of coupling in knife edge, but there's plenty of aileron and elevator authority to counter that coupling, and once you get it settled in, it tracks pretty good in the knife edge. The Arrows Husky is a lot like a lot of general aviation RC airplanes. They all tend to like rudder and coordinated turns, and the Husky's no exception. This one-wheeler's pretty good. We do one a little bit later in the bonus footage that got real interesting. Now we're going into the bonus footage, and right here I'm about to really get away with one. This is the one-wheeler that gets real interesting. Yep, I caught the wingtip there. Here's a fun way to turn a stall plane around. And a max performance climb on 4-cell. Not bad at all. And now I'm going to put it into a flat turn. The Husky's really stable in cross control situations. It's really easy to get into kind of an off-camber stall doing stuff like this. I'm pretty much at full deflection rudder in these flat turns, and it never threatens to do anything nasty. That's pretty impressive. We're going to do a nice little slip pass here, and that's going to be accentuated by the kind of thing you hear behind you at a flying field in Georgia.
I hear your phone, Jim. The roosters are crowing.
You don't hear that every day, do you? A little bit of a tumble there, and we're going to follow that up with a knife edge circle, and then we'll head back to the shop. Alright, hope you enjoyed the flying footage. So, to sum the Husky up, we'll start with the build. There's really not much of an assembly with this airplane. If you've built or assembled a couple of foamies before, this one won't really throw anything at you. Really the only fiddly part about it was fishing the wires from the wing through the fuselage. There's not as much room as you would think to get those wires through there. It was more tedious than I thought it would be. But other than that, everything was pretty simple. As far as the changes that we made, the first thing we did was we changed the tires. Now, anytime you put more weight down low and forward where tires go on this configuration of an airplane, a high-wing STOL plane, that actually aids you a bit in getting the airplane to flare and extend forward. A lot of times with a really super light foam airplane like this, there's a really small window between the point where you start to flare and the point that the plane will actually sink, stall, and land. A lot of times they want to kind of balloon a little bit, and adding a little bit of mass down here actually aids in stopping that and making the airplane land a little bit easier, a little bit more scale. Now, of course, anytime you add weight, that's going to increase the stall speed slightly, but it didn't increase it much. These are heavier tires than the stock tires, but with all this wing area and as light as the airplane is to start with, it handles that extra weight no problem at all. Now, the second thing we did was put the vortex generators on there from the Grand Tundra. Once we did that, we could actually tell a little bit of a difference. It did slow the stall speed down just a hair. The biggest change was when we actually made the flaps slotted flaps. When we did that, that really slowed the airplane down when I put a bunch of effort into adding power slightly and flaring with power and elevator. I could really get it slow. I found that it slowed down really good, and I can actually land with a lower deck angle, as you might expect with slotted flaps. So that slowed the plane down a little bit. But all that said, if the only thing somebody did was buy this airplane and add the Dubro 4.5-inch big wheels, which I would definitely do, I think you're going to love the way the airplane flies. You'll love the way it slows down. You'll love the way it lands. Just a great airplane. And a really neat thing is that even when you add this mass, it doesn't affect adversely the aerobatic capability of the airplane. As a sport plane, it's really aerobatic. And I find that it has plenty of power on 4-cell. That's a nice segue into their version 2, which they call the Ultimate. I thought Arrows was smoking something, to be honest with you, when they first came out with that, because it was a 5-cell system, which, as uncommon as 5-cell batteries are, not only with modelers, but also battery manufacturers, I just couldn't understand why they did that. Looked on their website today, and it turns out the new Ultimate version now is set up for 6-cell batteries, and that makes sense. Now, you saw the flying footage. I find the airplane as a sport plane more than aerobatic, more than powerful enough. It's got way more power than you need to do scale STOL flying, if that's what you want to do. But if you want ridiculous power on 6-cell, with the wooden prop that it comes with, the 6-cell system, it's going to be a ridiculous airplane. I mean, crazy power on 6L. So If you decide that you want that version, they're both available. You can still get this one and run it on 4-cell. You can get the 6-cell version if you want. 6-cell version is black and orange. Of course, this one is black and red. I think either one that you choose, you're going to be happy. This airplane is one of those that I would put in that category of just great, honest airframes. Some of the best airplanes that I've flown. This thing has no bad habits. Would it be good for a beginner? Probably not. I think if you had help, somebody to help you set this thing up and really dial the throws down, maybe set you up on a buddy system with their transmitter, you could train on something like this. But I think this would be best served as being somebody's second plane. I do think it would make a good second plane. It'd make a great tail dragger trainer, make a good first airplane with flaps. It's just super easy to fly, no bad habits. It's an amazing airplane, and we highly, highly recommend it. 2 thumbs up. So if you are looking for a cool, large foam STOL plane that is really aerobatic, go to Arrows RC, get yourself one of these. That's it for us. So take care of yourselves. Please like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you next week once again with something cool with wings. Take it easy.